Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Agents of Fandom podcast. I am your host today, TJ Pistilli. Our regular TJ is off saving the world right now, so I am the substitute TJ for today's episode. You may also know me as Fat Thor, but I'm not alone. You'll recognize this familiar face. I am joined with the lovely Adam. Adam, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. Yeah, we want to send other TJ. I feel like I'm in a little bit of a multiversal chaos situation right here, where one of my TJ co-hosts leaves, but he's replaced by another. You guys are more like Peter Parkers, where you're both TJs, but you look different. So that's. But no, we want to send our love to TJ, who I know we had him on the Star Wars show last night, but he can't be here today. He is a new dad. He's spending some time with his wife and his new baby girl. So we want to send him all of our love. We're super happy. We love you, TJ. But yeah, I'm excited to be here, man. Here in about 2 hours, I'm even more excited because I'm going to be seated for Godzilla X Kong. And you know that meme that's been going around lately on socials that's like, they will never make me hate you. That's kind of how I feel about all of these movies. Like all of these movies so far, I know they're not great. There's plenty to pick apart, but there's nothing that anybody can do to make me hate those movies. So I'm excited for that. But even more excited to talk about Invincible and X-Men with you, my man.
Dude, I cannot echo you more about Godzilla and Kong. We got a lot to get through today, so I'll make this very quick. But I'm the like mind of you, dude. You got two big monsters fighting each other. Take my money. Like, that's all I need. It's like I will agree, there's some problems in, those movies, just like everything else. But it's like, dude, you got Kong, Godzilla fighting monsters. Like, I'm done. That's all I need. I'm a happy customer. But let's get right into it, Adam. Invincible episode 7 premiered, I guess, last night, this morning, however, wherever your time zone is. But before we get into some of the nitty gritty stuff of this episode, I want to ask you before we get started, just your overall thoughts. What did you think of this episode 7?
Oh, well, I think this was actually one of my favorite episodes. Maybe even my favorite episode. And now, we always preface this by saying you and I both have seen the finale, so we won't be speculating on the things that will be to come there. But having seen now all the episodes, 16 episodes, I believe, of these first 2 seasons, this might be my favorite, more so because not as much what happens in the beginning in the first half, but the entire second half of this episode when a certain character shows up who we're going to talk about later. I don't remember being that enthralled for like 30 minutes, 25, however long it was, that like for that complete a period of time, just not being able to take my eyes off the screen and being so invested. I can't wait to talk about her later. Anissa, I was blanking on her name. We're going to talk about Anissa later, but overall, this was another great episode. I can never, if somebody held a gun to my head and was like, you have to come up with something bad to say about the show, I would just have to lie because I can't think, like, all these episodes are just perfect 10 out of 10s. Like, so often I'm watching different things and I'm like, yeah, like I'll give this like a 7. I'll give it an 8. It's great. It's good, but it's got this. Then I'm watching Invincible and I'm like, it's just from like episode 1, from the opening scene in episode 1, this show has been perfect. It's so special.
Just 10s across the board. I cannot agree more. And gun to my head, I'm going to be like Mark at the end of this episode, and I'm not doing it. I refuse. I can't say nothing bad about it. But yeah, we're going to get deep on the Anissa stuff. But before we get into the, kind of big climax of the episode, I want to talk about a few things before that happens, and something that I really love. And I'm pretty sure I saw you talking about it earlier. But so we start off this episode with Mark and Amber going to Comic-Con, and we get this great kind of meta conversation with the creator of Seance Dog about like animation and stuff like that. And I loved that scene so much. And I want to point out too, the writer of Seance Dog, I forget what his name is in the show, but he has a very striking resemblance to the artist of Invincible, Ryan Otley. I don't think it's not his voice, but it literally looks just like him. So just the whole meta-ness of that whole scene I loved. What do you think, Adam?
Oh, yeah. That's like what I think the Prime Video in general, with whether it's The Boys, Gen V, and Invincible, is like not afraid to just kind of let not break the fourth wall like Deadpool or like She-Hulk, which I still love it when they do it, but that's essentially what they're just breaking the fourth wall here in a very subtle way that's there's still like some plausible deniability. Like, no, he didn't look right in the camera and talk to the camera. Like, but it's so obvious that that's what they're talking about. And it's funny because there's a lot of conversation going on right now. Like, people aren't watching this show. Some people aren't watching the show because either the gap between season 1 and 2 was so long, like 3 years, or like I guess like closer to 2.5 years. And then even some of the people that did, I know some people that watched the first half and then realized we were getting this big midseason break, and they're already like, you know what? I'm like, I had to wait 3 years for the second season. Now you're going to make me wait again for the second. I'm out. I know a few people that aren't watching it. I'm trying to convince everybody that I know. It's like, you just have to try to put that out of your mind and get over it. The show is so good. But yeah, that whole scene is just, I've actually I saw the clip of it on Twitter today. I haven't had a chance to rewatch this episode. I did rewatch X-Men that we're going to talk about later. So it's been a few weeks since I rewatched this, but I read through the review or the recap to kind of refresh myself on everything. And when I saw that clip, I just watched it like 2 or 3 times in a row, and I was just cackling at it because that's just like great writing. Like you said, it's a meta commentary, and it's so like subtly aware of the conversation that's going. It like She-Hulk was really good at that too, right? They knew the kind of conversation that people were going to be having about that show. So then they wrote things into it to pick fun at those, like to make fun of those people that were picking on it and hating on it. And there was a lot of that here too. I loved it. This scene was great.
Yeah, and I mean, we even get some of that in X-Men too, so it seems like a common thread all across the board. But yeah, again, I just love the funniness of the meta conversation, and this is something that we do see happen in the comics of Invincible, but it's more a conversation about the comic industry as opposed to the animation. So I really loved how for the show they kind of use the same setup but flip it for animation. Just so smart. But then we also get Rex coming back, and he's showing off his new robot powers against Octoboss, which I thought was super fun villain. But what'd you think about Rex's new arm cannon and his new abilities?
Well, when you were here last, I think 2 weeks ago, talking about this show, I spoke about how Rex to me was always one of those guys that I was like, okay, he throws some little exploding, like one of those little pop rock things, not the ones that you chew, but the ones that you throw on the ground. You get those little toys those little things when you're little that come in the little white pouches. You throw them on the ground and they pop. That was always what his powers reminded me of. I was like, he's just throwing it. I did that when I was a little kid. So it was nice to me to see him, even though, when he gets shot in the head, he comes back. We obviously get to see how resilient and how strong he is. But it was nice for me to get to see him get this kind of upgrade that I think he deserved, and that to me makes him feel a little more. I know he's obviously not as strong as Mark and some of these other heroes, but that kind of gives him that level up. But it was also nice to see, because if I'm not mistaken, he was not supposed to be out there like that. He kind of left his recovery prematurely to go out there and fight, which obviously, it's not good for anybody to be doing that. But it's making me like Rex a little, because Rex has kind of been an asshole largely through the course of the show. There's not been a lot of reasons to like him, especially, or at least until the last few episodes. He's been much more humanized, I feel like, this season, especially than in the first. But again, to say that, I'm like, you know what? Like, that's the kind of thing Mark would do too. Like, even if he wasn't fully recovered, he would go out there to help somebody, to save somebody, to take on a villain or do something like that. So I don't know. Even though I think for Rex, it was much more of it wasn't as much about helping people probably as it was he just wanted to prove to himself that he could get back out there. But he's like Rex is like that candy that's like hard on the exterior, but there's a little gooey in the middle that if you can just chew down past those things and get to it, there's a lot to love with Rex.
Yeah, I love it too. And I really love it for all of the reasons that you just shouted out. But also something that we don't really get in the books that they emphasize more in the show is we get that little heart to heart with Rex and Mark, and like they're kind of talk, like he asked him about Amber. And the one part I really love, going to your point about like this is more for Rex than it is like anybody else, when he is talking to Mark and he's just like, dude, I need this, like I need, like, please, like I need this. And he's like, all right, man, like I love that. And I think it just goes to something we talked about in the last Invincible episode that we did, is that the show really takes the moments to really give us some more character work and our characters some more depth. And I think this is a great example of that, of like just the small addition of Mark and Rex having this little conversation. I think just really fleshes out both characters a lot more, and goes to what you're saying, like Rex being this lovable character underneath all the hard exterior that we've come to know. So yeah, I thought this was great.
Oh yeah, yeah, he's been great. Another thing that kind of struck me in this episode, I saw you and you had it on the rundown too, was kind of like the state of the Guardians, and it made me really start to stop and think about. Excuse me, I was like, since Omni-Man just completely dismembers the Guardians in the end of the first episode of this series, episode 1, season 1, episode 1, the whole team has really kind of been in shambles for all 2 seasons. Like Cecil's been trying to patch it together. Like they've got a good team. I'm not saying, like, obviously, I think they're kind of rocking with the B team here. None of these were supposed to be the starters, but now they're in. This is all we got. So now we're rocking with it. But it's funny because
MCU 2008.
Right. we see Cecil like going around and asking people to join and doing all this, and he's kind of worn out his welcome a little bit because people are like, nah, I'm good, but like I'll be there to help when you need it, but I'm not going to be in your facility training, doing the stuff you say. I'm not going to. I think people kind of see through him a little bit now, and this whole charade, like that being a hero doesn't necessarily mean you have to, be a hero for the government or be a hero for the Global Defense Agency, I believe it's called. Like that you can still be a hero on your own terms and do good and stuff like that. But it is funny because when I saw that, it was like the first time I thought about it, that ever since we see Omni-Man just tear through all of them, they really have not had like a cohesive team that gets along and works together. That's got like that people aren't on and off of leaving. I don't know, that was like that was kind of a funny thing for me to finally notice, just because we're going through. It's one thing we've talked about in the past too, is how well the show does it, like navigating multiple storylines. And I think the Guardians have kind of always been either like the B or the C storyline, because Mark and what's going on with Mark and his dad is always at the front, as it should be. And I still love everything we've gotten with the Guardians, but this was the first time that made me think, like, wow, they've just been in shambles for 3 years now.
Yeah, and we got Bulletproof, like, just flat out explaining all of it. Like, we got this dude who, changed himself into a kid so he could be with her. Then we got a guy who's so old he shits dust and he's depressed. Like, that was so funny. I love that, which I don't hate Bulletproof, but screw Bulletproof as a character. But that was really funny, like kind of commentary that he had for the Guardians. And I want to say too, you had some really great analysis there with the Guardians kind of being the side kind of team, B team, because that's definitely how it is in the books. But it all comes together. It's all, it's all important. And something else I want to point out too is the monster girl and robot kind of thing. And I feel like in the show, we've alluded to this a little bit. And I want to say it was last episode, we finally got mentioned in the show about how, like, when Monster Girl changes into her monster form, she continuously is aging backwards. So, like, eventually she's just going to be like a baby. And that's something that's super important, like, moving forward. And that's kind of really the basis of their relationship in the comics, is Robot trying to, help her with her powers. So I really love that we're starting to, kind of get into that a little bit into the show.
Yeah, she reminds me so much of what's that character in Gen V, the one of the main characters, the girl who had to like throw up and make herself sick to kind of turn small. I just tend to gravitate towards these characters and like feel more for these characters that have to pretty much harm themselves or do something that's not good for them in order to like help other people, but that's a sacrifice that they're willing to make. And like, it's funny because in Monster Girl's case, Rudy, I believe is his name, right? Rudy, it's like Robot, and then Rudy is the kid, if I'm not mistaken. So like Rudy's constantly telling her like, and I feel like he's being pretty polite in general too. Like, I'm just trying to help you. But then it's also one of those situations where when you're trying to help somebody like that, you have to do it on their terms. You can't help somebody before they're, and there's like a lot of parallels in life with that in general. When you want to help somebody, you can't do it before they're ready or you'll push them away. That's just like a common thing. And that's what he's trying to do. And I feel that because it's hard to watch somebody that you care about struggle. But in this case, it's like, you've already shot your shot like 4 or 5 times. You need to just leave her alone, let her get to this on her own, and then be there to help her when she realizes it. But it is hard to watch her go through this, even though I personally can't now. Like, I haven't binged it, so I haven't watched everything like in succession to see maybe if I could tell a difference. But I'm never I think the aging thing is decremental in a way that's not super obvious, that I'm not like, wow, she was 16 last episode and now she's 8. Like
Yeah.
it's not, it's a little more subtle, and I don't have a problem with that at all, but it's something that I was wondering about, if that was like maybe something that I was missing, because I just had like, I'm focusing on so much other stuff, that if I would go back and watch, like when she first joined the team, maybe she was way older, like 16, 17. I really don't even remember, because I know they talk about, it's aging her down, and it seems like every episode she's going into this monster girl form. So this has got to
Yeah.
be not great for her. But I don't know. What do you know about her from your history with the character, like in the comics? Is that more of a subtle thing, like I'm talking about, or is it much more obvious and I just wasn't paying attention?
No, I mean, you hit it right on the head, and that's kind of what I'm talking about. Like in the books, that's like very well known information, and that's like when Rudy and her start like their kind of relationship, like we saw in the beginning of this season, like when they go to the movies and stuff like that. All of that starts from Rudy offering to help her with her powers. And like that's kind of how their relationship even begins, how they start to get close to each other. So in the show, and like you said, I mean, I watched a lot of this show, but I haven't like watched everything in one sitting. But I want to say they didn't really touch on that until this like last episode, where Robot talks to Cecil and straight up, says, like explains how she gets younger every time she uses the powers. So that's been something I've been kind of waiting for, which is why, like I said, I like that they added it into this episode, because it shows like, okay, we're getting to that stuff now. You know what I mean? It was something that has been missing from the show, but now it seems like they're starting to get into it, which goes to like, you guys talk about all the time, how the storylines of this show are very copy paste, which is like one of the things that makes this show so incredible, because they're able to translate the comics so well, sometimes like one-to-one translation, but they're mixing up storylines from like 30 issues ahead. You know what I mean? It's crazy how they're able to do it and still make it cohesive.
Oh yeah, I mean they're doing a great job with it. And speaking of characters that are aging, except kind of the opposite of her, in that it's not as much, not as subtle. Oliver, I feel like every time we see him on the
Yes.
screen, it looks like, and now, excuse me, I know that they talk about it in the beginning, and even at the end of part 1, if I'm not mistaken, episode 4, episode 3, somewhere around there, that Thraxon's life cycle is very, very short. So
Hmm.
when Mark goes away for a week and comes back, that might be the equivalent of Oliver aging like 2 years. But it has been funny to see, when they first bring him home, he can't even walk. Like they're carrying him like a baby. And then now, like when Mark is walking in the door, he's running up to him and he's speaking and doing all these different things. So I don't know. I'm just so interested. I'm trying to kind of be vague, because again, we know the things that are going to happen next episode. So I'm trying not
Yeah.
to allude too much, but that's just such an interesting thing, and that shows like a lot of growth, right? Between, I mean, with their whole family, especially with Debbie. Garrett, myself, and Garrett were talking about this. We miss Garrett so much. We haven't had him on this, former co-host of the Agents of Fandom podcast, who I don't think has been on since Ahsoka. But we were talking about what's it called, the with like the whole Debbie of this season, how she's
Love
constantly,
Debbie. Love
she's
Debbie.
like like Garrett was like, I feel like there's a case for, even though she doesn't have superpowers, like Debbie is the strongest character for all she's constantly having to put up with and endure. And I'm
Hmm.
like, she never ceases to, it's like she's the model for being a good person, but that being a good person isn't easy. Like, and I
Yeah.
almost said it's not always easy, but it's like even more, being a good person is rarely easy. It's like the
Hmm.
same stuff with Captain America too. Like, when Nat tells him in Civil War, like sometimes the path of like least resistance isn't always or like most resistance isn't always the right path. It's
Hmm.
like, well, that's technically correct, but more often than not, it is. Like, it would have been so much easier for Debbie to just drop Oliver off with the GDA, and then there's no
Yep.
telling what would have become of him. We talked about that the last time you were on too, that
Hmm.
he's getting a much more human. So he's developing a much more human, and kind of a personable side to him now, that would be completely absent if he was being raised in a dorm room in the GDA training with the Guardians. Like, he's getting
Yeah.
that same stuff that Mark has. Now you would be, I know you know much more about, because you've read all the comics about like what's in store for Oliver and stuff like that. Like, I have no idea. what's coming for him. But I don't like that face you just made. Kind of scared me a little bit. I'll be honest. But
let me just say, enjoy him as a baby. Enjoy baby Oliver. I'll say that, and I'll also say too, I feel like the show is kind of slowing his aging just a bit, because in the book it's very rapid. Like it's like one issue, he's a baby. Next one, he's like playing catch with, Mark, and he's like a toddler, right? So it seems like they're slowing that just a little bit to give us more time, I think, to build a relationship with, baby Oliver. But something else I want to point out, because I don't want to spoil anything. This isn't a spoilers for the show, but even for the comic books, because comic books are so great. I want people to discover it themselves. But something to remember is, like you talked about, not only do Thraxans age super rapidly, but they also learn things very, very rapidly. And not only learn things very rapidly, but they can remember every single day of their lives, like from the moment that they were born. So something I just kind of want to leave you to chew on, and like the people at home to think about, like what's going to happen with Oliver. He's taking all of this in right now, like all this stuff that's happening. He's taking all that in, and like, just think about what that could mean for when he starts developing powers. Because that's another kind of point of this conversation that they have, is that he isn't showing signs of powers yet. But like I said, what's that going to, like, the way that he ages super rapidly, he can learn rapidly. It'll be interesting when he starts to get powers and things move on from there for sure.
Well, it's been funny for them to be kind of constantly talking about the power stuff. And I'm like, when we first pick up in the series, like in the very beginning, season 1, Mark is what, like a senior in high school, and he still doesn't have powers yet because he's in college now. So it's like, Oliver looks like he's, barely, he's like still a toddler. He just started walking. So that seems odd to me that they wouldn't be, that they're kind of asking about it and talking about it, because it's like, I know too, when early in the show, when Mark they're talking about, he's like, maybe I'm not going to get my powers or whatever. Like maybe they won't be a thing, because they probably would have come in by now. So maybe that's another thing that you could speak to more than me. I don't know if that's, how often Viltrumites are going. I know it's not a common thing based on how it seems to be very unacceptable for Viltrumites to be going around and having babies with other, to them, what they deem as like less pure people, just because they're not going to be as strong as them. But like, I don't know, that seems that's just one of those things. I'm like, are there half Viltrumite like babies that are out here with powers? They're like 2 and 3 years old. I don't know.
Well, let me tell you, Adam. So, I just want to nerd out with you, right? Like so bad right now, and say, like, spoil all this stuff, but I can't. Like, I'll just say, like, you are on the right track, my friend. Like, you are asking the right questions for sure. But I don't want to, we can answer maybe when we stop recording here, and if you don't mind the spoilers, we can talk. But that question that you're asking though, like, how do Viltrumites, procreate with other species? All that stuff is, like, you're on the right track. Like, that's very important to things that are coming. So you're in the vein, man. You're asking the right questions here.
Oof. Yeah, speaking of Viltrumites too, I'm just moving on because now my head is like going nuts, and I'm ready to hear what you have to say about that.
I wish I could. Oh, I wish I could, but I mean, it's definitely going to be coming in the show, and that's like a huge. It's one of those things, like, we gotta wait for that. The people at home, you gotta wait.
That's enough peace for me. That puts my mind at peace to know that it's coming, and know that it's a thing, and that I'm asking the right questions. But
yeah, you are, man. You're right on it.
Speaking of Viltrumites, we have to now. It's time. We spent 25 minutes covering the whole rest, like everything that precedes this, the beginning of the episode. We have to talk about when Mark and Amber are out on their date, and then all of a sudden, Amber's got, was it a knife? She's just got her something.
No,
I don't think it was a knife. I think she was just holding her hand. Right.
She's just grabbing
That's
her
right.
neck,
I was like, she
dude.
doesn't. Why would a Viltrumite need a knife? As soon as I said that, I was like, that's so. Why does it even make sense? But
she's like,
oh my gosh. What would now you have like I talked about how much this made me geek out, like the whole sequence. We'll talk about like the whole sequence later, but for you, like I didn't even know who this was, or like I don't have any history with this character until she said like when she first showed up, I wasn't like, oh my god, that's Anissa. Oh my god, this is you. Like I was like, what the fuck is this? This is just another Viltrumite. And then it was as this whole kind of sequence progresses from here to the end of the episode is what to me is some of the best storytelling this show has ever done. What was your reaction to seeing her for the first time? Did you see that? Is this kind of following what happens in the comics? Like, did you see this coming at all, or was this a shock to you?
So yes and no. So like this particular whole sequence with Anissa, this takes place in issue 44 through issue 45 in the books. But I'm not going to spoil, but something that happens in the next episode happens way before all of this Anissa stuff, right? So again, going back to how they're like kind of playing around with different storylines and the placement of them. So I wasn't really expecting her to show up when she did, given where we're at in the show and, you know, in relation to the comic book. But when she did, I'm like, okay, it's, you know, we're getting there. You get what I mean? It's like there's so many things in this show that, I mean, I think the sequids is another great example. It's like when we first see the sequid, it's like, oh shit, okay, we're going the sequid route, right? So it was like Anissa shows up and it's like, okay, again, I don't want to spoil the comics too much, but it's like shit's hitting the fan now. Like we're cooking with gas, more than gas now. Like shit's really starting to get going. So I mean, it was just crazy to see her show up. It's exciting for not only just the cool scene that we get, but what's going to be coming after that. And something else I want to point out just very quickly, in the comics, it's actually Debbie that she threatens and not Amber. And at this portion of the books, Amber and Mark are already broken up and he's with Eve at this point. So he's kind of just out with lunch with Debbie. I mean, it serves the same purpose, but I think it goes to something that we're going to talk about after this scene with Mark and Amber. So I thought it was interesting to supplement Amber in that role as opposed to Debbie.
And you know, when she first showed up, and I remember texting you about it when we were first watching this like a month and a half ago, and freaking out. And I know that sentence just screamed of press privilege. Excuse me. I could have just said when we were first watching it. I didn't have to also throw in a month ago. That was disgusting of me. How dare me? But I remember when I first watching this and then looking up some more about her character, because that's kind of who like the way I approach all this stuff, because I've read some comics and mostly like Deadpool stuff because that's just my favorite character. So I like reading Deadpool comics, like especially the ones where he interacts and does stuff with other characters. But I'm not like something like Invincible comics. I could not be less familiar. I've never picked up and read one in my life. So when I see a character like this, I'm the reason that we talk about writing articles like who is Anissa and this kind of stuff, because that's immediately what I went to look up. And I read some stuff about her, particularly like between her and Mark, that I was like, whoa, what? Like,
yeah,
I don't want to say. I also don't want to say it because I'm like, I don't. In case it is coming in the show, you know, I don't want to spoil it for anybody. But if you got, for people that are interested, anybody listening to this, apparently the two of them have a pretty rich history in the future. Like, if you're not afraid of having things spoiled, you know, that they may be coming. Now I know you talk a lot though about how this show is great at kind of adapting stuff that makes it feel one for one, almost exactly how it appears in the comics, but also adding stuff and, you know, kind of being complementary. That's what we always talk about with adaptations of anything, being complementary, not contradictive. But I won't go into all the stuff that I read because a lot of it was absolutely nuts. But what did you think about the one of the things that struck me was like, it was pretty obvious that she could have killed him, right? But that was not her. She could have, but she also couldn't have, like, because then they would have just killed. Like, that wasn't her task. That wasn't her job. So when she's just beating the hell out of him, and then she's like, just say it. Just say it. And he completely, and then you got Cecil in his ear who's like, Mark, just tell her so she'll leave. And he's like, I don't even remember what he said. He's just spitting up blood. He's like, no.
Yeah, he's like, hell no, I'm not doing it.
Even part of me was like, I don't like watching you get your ass kicked, Mark. Just say it and so she'll leave. Like, But then that's kind
Like,
of
you don't
part of
gotta
what
mean
makes
it, dude.
Mark.
Just say it.
Right. Just say
Yeah.
it. You know you're not
Yeah.
going to actually do it. Just that's the same thing that happened with General Craig at the end of episode 4. I mean, granted, Mark was almost dead, so he didn't really have much of he couldn't really respond, didn't really have much of a choice. But like, just say I get it, and that's also part. It's like funny, right? This is like frustrating watching Mark, but it's also part of why we love him because this resilience and this like unwavering determination to do what's right. What did you think about all that?
I mean, I absolutely loved it. And it kind of goes again to another slight change from the book is like that whole point and that whole aspect of Mark is like the most fundamental and important piece of his character. Like his unwaveringness to stand on his morals and like to do what he thinks is right, which we sometimes see isn't always the best course of action. So in the books, when they have this conversation when he has this conversation, uh like she's trying to convince him that like this is a good thing, and we don't really get this where he's standing on his moral, like refusing to say that he's gonna take over for the Viltrums. And I think adding this into this kind of confrontation, like you said, just highlights that very, very important aspect of Mark's character. And that's something that, again, it's the most fundamental part of who Mark is, and it's constantly what we will be seeing gets him into these situations, even moving forward. So I think adding a real emphasis on that with like refusal to complain, even though it means nothing, again, just goes back to what we talk about, how really get the characters opportunity to really get more depth. Sorry, I lost you for a second. To get more depth character. I also want to say, again, going back to Anissa, however you pronounce it, she's slightly changed a little bit in the show as well, in the sense of like she's very much more aggressive in this scene, where she's like, don't get me wrong, she's definitely aggressive in the books when this happens, but again, she's more kind of trying to convince Mark, and she even goes as far as saying like, the Viltrumites will turn Earth into a utopia, and in return we will take some like it's more of a partnership that she's proposing, like Earth live in peace, we'll take some, and by time that we get what we need, it'll be like thousands of years of Earth time. Like the planet would be dead by people way before that if we don't intervene. So I thought it was interesting in the show. I find that her argument was a lot more aggressive and a lot more like, we're doing this, and we're gonna kill all you got. You know what I mean? Like she was a little bit more aggressive with how she came about this whole interaction. And I think that goes to what you're alluding to, like kind of the, what we will see of her and Mark in the future. My Invincible heads out there that have read the books, you guys know what I'm talking about. But I think it's a good opportunity that what we're talking about will also be a good opportunity to give Mark and the whole topic of what happens with them a lot more emphasis, and really dive into what happens between them. And that's something the book does very well. But again, going to all these changes we talk about with the show, I think the show is going to be able to do it in a really great way to show both a need and in different lights. Another thing, another thing, again, you're in the thing of, we have a lot more to learn about Viltrumite culture, right? Like we know a little bit from what Nolan told us, but we have a lot more to learn about their history, what they're really trying to do. And so again, like all of this just is setting all of that in motion.
Yeah, so something else, and apologies if I'm picking up at a different spot. You were kind of cutting out on me a little bit there,
Oh,
but one thing that
please.
I was thinking about when you were talking was that talking about Anissa in particular and how she was kind of approaching this whole situation. It reminded me a little of
Mm-hmm.
like Thanos, where the villain, the oppressor, has this kind of twisted view on it, that they're actually like, what they're doing is actually right because they're helping. Because like from Anissa's perspective, it's like Earth is going to be extinct in 100 or two, however many years, but like we can help you guys
Yeah.
live thousands of years. And then we like all the heroes, they all say the same thing. It's like, well, Earth deserves their own chance to fail, like, and make their own mistakes and do these and that's just that righteous, that sense of right that all these heroes have. And that's how you know when a show is doing something right and it's pulling this stuff off well, when they're doing things that we've seen before, but it's still like, it's not, this is nothing new. This whole, like, the villain being like, no, like, I'm actually trying to help you. Like, I know, even though I've beaten you within an inch of your life, and we've, doing all these things, and we've killed so many people and wiped out so many planets, we're actually trying to help you. Like, that's that real twisted, like, sick, kind of mentality that we've seen so many times, but it also feels like it's done really well here. Like, I'm not watching like, here we go again. Here's another villain who thinks they're doing right. Like, I'm like, you know what? I don't want the Viltrumites to take over, but I get what she's saying. Like, I get it from her perspective. And like, for some people, I'm sure there would be people that would see the appeal in that, like, take all these problems away because but then it's like, you're just completely giving yourself over to something else like that then they would have no control. Like, Viltrum could completely wipe out Earth. Like, a few Viltrumites could, maybe even one.
I say
Viltrumite
one
could completely wipe. Yeah, because like, that's the whole reason that they sent Nolan there in the first place, was to either prepare them for rule or wipe them out. So like, one strong Viltrumite could get the job done. But we've got to, man, we've already been going for almost 45 minutes on Invincible. The last thing I want to talk about is, we got to talk about Mark and Amber, right? Because this has kind of been something that we've seen coming throughout the whole course of the season. They've been growing apart, not by nature of either one of them doing anything wrong, just by, like, they're in two completely different worlds, and it's almost impossible for these worlds to kind of coexist together in a way that would allow them to be happy in a relationship. And that was the first thing I was thinking when Anissa first shows up and she's got her hand on Amber's throat. I remember being like, okay, Mark, like, you have got to this is the stuff Peter Parker's talking about. Like, now you're putting your family in danger because, like, everybody, or like, obviously everybody on the planet doesn't know who he is, but it's like, you're, by like getting close to people, but that's a tough thing to walk, right? Because heroes deserve to be close to people too. So it's like, oh, do you not? I'm not. Then because I said that out loud, and I was like, okay, now I feel like an asshole for saying Mark doesn't deserve to be happy.
Mark deserves to be alone forever. He has to. He can never love anybody.
Now you're sounding like a Spider-Man fan who always seems like Spider-Man fans always want Peter Parker to be broke, alone, and miserable all the time. Like, he could not.
No one hates
like
Spider-Man
the whole MCU
more.
trilogy.
Yep. No one hates Spider-Man more than Spider-Man fans, Adam. I'll tell you that right now.
That's so true, because throughout the whole trilogy, everybody, like the MCU trilogy, everybody was like, he's relying too much on Tony Stark. He's doing this and this. He shouldn't be using. And it's like, why don't we let Spider-Man, whose father died and whose uncle died, have a nice fatherly figure like Tony?
Yeah.
Also a fatherly figure who we all loved. It wasn't like they tried to force something. I'm going way off track talking about Tony and Peter. That's something that's always bothered me.
I'm here for it. I am here for it, dude. I will talk about this all day long. I got thoughts, my friend. I have thoughts.
If I wasn't going to see the movie in like close to an hour now, dude, I would be down to just sit here and talk because I'm not above a 3-hour podcast.
I was like, TJ's going to be like, dude, 4 hours? Jeez, dude.
But back to what I was before, I started talking about Mark and Amber, and the next thing I'm talking
Mark
about
and
Peter and Tony Stark. But like, I'm not even going to ask you if you were surprised, because I don't think anybody was surprised with what we saw coming. But do you think that this was like, I'm trying to, I don't even know the right way, because this was just such an obvious thing, right? Like this, we all knew this was coming, and I think we all know he's going to end up with Eve eventually, just because the two of them, like, that's kind of the one thing that they're not really doing subtly, especially this in part 2 of this season. It's very obvious, like, hey, Mark and Amber aren't working out, and hey, Mark and Eve have this great chemistry together. So I don't know. Could you talk, like, actually, I know you also mentioned too earlier something that I think would be good, that when Anissa comes and to do all this, she originally threatens Debbie, not Amber. And you said that was because Mark and Amber were already broken up at that point. How does their relationship in the show differ from how it has in the comics thus far.
Oh, dude, like day and night different, completely different. I mean, like this, there's the same bare bones there, right? But Amber in the show is much more understanding of Mark's situation. She's a lot more on equal footing to Mark, that I would say, both in the show as a character and in their relationship together. Perfect example was last episode when we have that scene of Amber and Eve talking, juxtaposed with Art and Mark. And that doesn't happen in the book. And again, that just kind of, for me, was a way for the show to give us as the audience Amber's side of the story too, as opposed to in the books, we kind of really just get Mark's side and Amber just is kind of there. And their breakup, so you said, like, was I surprised? I actually was surprised, because in the book their breakup comes before this happens. And again, their breakup is very much more Mark comes in and like has this big spiel about like, oh, like, you know, this isn't fair to you, and like blah blah, saying a lot of the similar things that we see in the show. But Amber literally just says, okay. And then he's like, okay. And she's like, yeah, like, you know, I agree with everything you said. Like, can we snuggle one more time before you go? And like, that's it. And then they're just like, they're broken up. So I loved here again, like, we let Amber have a voice here in this conversation. And we get to see her perspective of this whole conflict in their relationship, and even goes so far as like saying like, she kind of not blames herself, but she has that great line of saying like, you know, you're going off to save the world and stuff, like, so how can I be upset about that? But like, I still am upset about that, you know what I mean? Which is like very human thing. Like, obviously that's how a real person would feel, and especially if your boyfriend's a superhero. So I mean, the whole thing was just, I thought, so great. I think it makes their relationship a lot more healthier than it was in the comic books. Again, gives Amber a lot more authority in the relationship. And it makes me very interested to see where Amber might pop up next, because it really feels like in the show they're giving her a lot more of a character arc, and especially like her relationship with Eve now. Like, they're kind of a lot closer friends, I would say, than in the books. So I feel like we're going to see more of Amber moving forward. And in the books, this is kind of the, like, we get one more thing with Amber in a couple issues later, but this is kind of the end of Amber in the book. So I really can't imagine like she's not gonna, like, Zazie Beetz is not gonna be in next season, right? Like, I can't see that happening. So I'm very interested to see where this is gonna go with Amber.
As other TJ always says, when somebody finishes making just so many great points in a row, I couldn't agree more, especially with what you said about Amber too. I don't think you get somebody like Zazie Beetz and then she's just all of a sudden gone. Like, especially when I think they have shows, or they have big plans for the show beyond just these 2 seasons. I know they're already either, I would say, working on or maybe even done with season 3. I know they said they're trying to kind of stockpile as many as they can so they won't be this big kind of gap that they've had here again. But I certainly hope that's the case. I know we had Angstrom on the rundown too. I think we can kind of gloss over that a little quickly. Just
that's
because,
more next episode.
Yeah, and we have. I can't exactly say what do you think's in store for Angstrom next episode. So it was great to get to see
Stay
him.
tuned, everybody.
Yes, stay tuned, exactly. So let's pivot here and we'll talk about some X-Men 97. Because
let's get some mutant love going in the chat now. We went hard on the Invincible, dude. We got to get to the mutants.
Let's do it, man. Yeah, see, it was so great to talk about this show last week as well. And for me, we talked about this last week. I haven't seen my experience with the X-Men is strictly the live action movies, which I feel like, having seen this and just having heard people talk about comics and other things, is such a like kind of dumbed down version of like of how great they can be, like what they were in those surface, early 2000s. Man. Yeah. And even now, what I've seen from them in this show so far is, oh my gosh, it's brilliant. I love this whole episode. I tweeted about this, that it felt like now I'll preface this by saying I've never done acid, but it felt like to me what the best parts of doing, what I imagine the best parts of doing acid are like that make people want to go back and do it. Like that crazy trip, the color in this episode. This was some of the best animation just in general that I've seen, like on any show, not even just from Marvel, just like any animated thing that I've ever watched. The color here was brilliant and everything was super well done, super polished. It looked great, but not overly so. Not like, just to throw it back, in the very beginning of the Invincible episode when they're talking about that we're having that kind of meta commentary that you're talking about, and in the end he says, and sometimes they overdo it and it looks like a completely different show. They like teetered that line so well here to me that everything looked great and they were like close, but they never went overboard to where I was like, whoa, okay, that was too much. It still all felt very contained to me. What did you think about this episode?
Oh, I mean, I loved it, dude. We got Jean doing some psychic mind battles. We got Magneto doing some cool shit. We get my boy Bishop gets a great moment, and I want to echo what you're saying too. Like the color of this episode was so great, and I don't know what it is. I mean, it's the same thing you were just kind of talking about, and I don't understand like art and animation enough to really describe why it feels like this, but I don't know how they do it to where it, like you said, it looks new and like some of the best animation out right now, but it still has like that 90 feel to it, like the original series did. Like, I don't know if it's the color grading or how. Again, I don't know enough about it to describe how that happens, but however they do it is just incredible because it, like I said, it looks so fresh and new, but it's still, I feel like a 10-year-old kid watching it, like I did back in the day. So, yeah, I mean, we're talking about how great Invincible is and how, it's like a perfect adaptation or whatnot. This is also just like, it's 10 out of 10, 10s across the board. I could never have asked for anything more, really.
Yeah, I agree. And then, so let's get right into the kind of nitty gritty, the specifics
Get
of it,
into the
because,
meat of it.
let's do it. To me, we were talking about last week that I had no idea what was coming. Now, you saw, if I'm not mistaken, you saw this episode as part of the screener. So,
yes,
you
yeah. So
kind of
you
got to
saw
see
this. You saw this fresh with everybody, right? Okay.
Right. So the first time I watched this was yesterday. I had to wait a whole week, and I had no idea what was going to happen to Jean. Now, I remember, I'll kind of I'll package these next two questions for you together here. I remember once he shows up, like reading and hearing that Mr. Sinister would be the main villain in this, but my only history with Mr. Sinister in anything is like Marvel Strike Force and Marvel Snap are like the only two things that I know nothing
The
about.
mobile games.
Now, exactly. And the only thing that I know he had some kind of tie to cloning because one of his powers in Marvel Strike Force, a mobile game, which I used to play just way too much, is like a clone. Like he can create a clone of somebody on the enemy team to kind of fight for him. So as soon as I'm watching all this, it made sense. I never pieced that together. But like when you were watching this for the first time, now with your history, did you know like, okay, Sinister clone Jean and she's going to be that? Is that exactly like, did you 100% see that coming or was any part of that a shock to you?
I mean, it's pretty much how it goes in the comics. There's like some slight differences here. I really love the way they set it up with like the two Jeans in the doorway, you know what I mean? Like, oh, who's the clone? Because I mean, there's so many X books, so all my X fans out there, forgive me if I get some of this wrong, but I think it had like Madelyne Prior, which we learn, later on that's the clone's name. She shows up just like as Madelyne Prior, and she's like, oh, she looks a lot like Jean. Like we don't learn that she's a clone until like later. And so I thought that the addition of like adding the kind of suspense of like, oh my God, there's two Jeans, right? Like I love that aspect of it. And I mean, Sinister, he pops up all over the place, and I mean, he's just a nasty dude. Morph gives a great kind of rundown of his character in this episode, talking about how he was a scientist like back in the 30s or in the 1800s, and he basically started just experimenting on mutants in order to prolong his life and like give himself powers. So yeah, I knew it was coming, but I love the way in which they laid it out for us. But I gotta ask you, Adam, since you didn't you're kind of fresh on the X-Men stuff, like you just said, you only watch the movies. So after that, when Jean goes into the room with the baby and like Sinister, flips the switch on her, what was your reaction to that? Like when she goes, I mean, for lack of a better word, goblin mode.
So I was shocked because I know how just by the nature of being in this space for as long as I have and hearing people talk about it, I know how powerful Jean Grey is. So I was like, wait a minute, he can just kind of like control her. Like if this is everything that we know about Jean, she was obviously like a clone, so similar in how she was a clone that nobody on the X-Men noticed. They weren't like, wow, Jean, you're usually so much more powerful. So he obviously made her just as powerful. Now I don't know if that's the kind of thing where he kind of coded this into her where no matter how powerful he made her, that he would always still be able to control her. I don't know exactly how but that was the thing that struck me the most, which kind of established Mr. Sinister as this really terrifying villain. I thought he did great. Now, apologies, I'm not sure. I can't think off the top of my head who voices him, but the guy voicing him does a great job. But I kept thinking like, okay, he can control Jean Grey, who by all counts is like every time we hear people talk about her is like one of the strongest mutants ever. Maybe the strong. I don't know the hierarchy, the tiers there, but I know she's really strong. So if he can just take over her mind, and now like strength can mean it's like different things for different people, right? Like obviously Wolverine's really strong, but I wouldn't be surprised if somebody was able to take over Wolverine's mind and turn him, because he's not like the most or he is headstrong, but not in the sense that like I'm like, wait, somebody's able to take over. Like, no, like he's just beef. He's brawny strong, not like, he's not
physical
muscly strong. Exactly. And I'm like, watching that brain. He doesn't have the brains as much as he has the brawn. That's the word that I was thinking of, right? That's like the comparison I was thinking of. But like Jean has both. She's brilliant. And then she's also can literally, her powers are like mind control. So if she wasn't even able to stop him from getting into her head, that to me says a lot about like the kind of villain. Now they end up cleaning the board with him by the end of this episode. I mean, obviously he's going to be back. We know he's going to be back, but oh man, it also seemed to me with this whole scene, like he kind of played and used his best card. Like Jean was obviously the strongest one. Now I could be completely wrong about that because there could be crazy other things coming that I can't foresee, but I'm like, you already played the Jean card and you lost like the clone Jean and you lost. I'm like, you're screwed now.
Yeah, that's a big loss.
And you lost your biggest card. That was the thing that stood out to me the most.
Yeah, and I mean, you're right on the money, Adam. Jean is one of the most powerful mutants in the X-Men. And I mean, there's a whole, again, I'm very knowledgeable about X-Men, but there's so much out there. It's like impossible to know everything, but there's a whole classification system of mutants. Like we got the shout out in the first episode where they call Storm an Omega level mutant. So Jean is up there for sure. And I mean, like you said, they played the Jean card and lost already. So Sinister is not in a great position there. But I gotta ask you too, something that we nerded out about on the last episode with Magneto. So they, discover it's Sinister, they go infiltrate the place, and then we get another face off between the Goblin Queen, the clone Jean, and then the X-Men, and we get this awesome scene with Magneto and her facing off. And I just want to nerd out with you about it. How awesome was that scene? What were your thoughts of Magneto stepping up to the Goblin Queen?
Dude, that was nuts. My favorite part of it too was that she was like, I can't remember exactly what she says to him. She was like, your powers are just like magnet, like your telekinetic powers pale in comparison to mine. And she's right, like she can do everything that he can do, but like
better,
so much more, better, and also more. Because he can manipulate magnetic fields and do these things, but like we've seen when they put him in a room full of plastic. Now, maybe that's something that strictly is to the movies and not in the comics, but you can't put Jean Grey in a room full of plastic and it's not going to do anything like it is to Magneto. So, I mean, it's like he's the new leader. It was good to see him stand up to her, like being the new leader of the team. Like he's got to set that example. And I think it was it Storm and maybe even the end of episode 1. No, it was early last episode, early episode 2. When she's like, you have to forgive us for not trusting you so easily. Like a villain, you've been a villain, like, to welcome you in and trust you so easily. And I like that he's really working hard to earn it. But that whole fight was one of the ones that stood out to me as like with the colors. with like all the yellow and particularly the bubble and the the metal that he was pulling towards himself, and the green and the purple that she was using. Like I was almost in sensory overload watching this whole fight, but like in the best way possible. I felt like I was getting ready to have like a seizure from watching all the colors. I was like, this is incredible. Like I want more. Like that whole fight scene was just so well done. Now it's your turn to nerd out about it.
Dude, I mean, so odd. And like you said, I mean, the way in which we see Jean using her powers against like Magneto's powers, who in a lot of cases are very similar, but we see the differences here. Like when she uses the glass to come at him with that, I thought that was just super cool. Like, what are you going to do now, man? You know what I mean? Like, you're kind of screwed. So yeah, I love that. And I also loved it for the point that you brought up of like really seeing Magneto trying to accomplish this mission that was set to him by Charles. And we get that amazing speech from him in the last episode of like, you know, Charles entrusted me with his dream, and like that dream doesn't mean like you have to love us, but we have to share this world. And it really feels like he is committed to that. And I think, like you said, seeing him really take center stage with the mutants, going on a mission together, it just was really cool to see all that, you know, kind of come together. And then we got to talk about, speaking of colors and craziness, the whole trippy, you know, like you said, acid trip that we get with Jean and the Battle of the Minds, dude. I love that. I mean, that's like typical X-Men, especially Jean Grey's, like, again, mind battle stuff. Oh, I love it. But what did you think about the whole, and also too, her kind of taking Clone Jean, or, you know, Goblin Queen, through her memories and like, you know, going through that kind of stuff?
I always love it. It reminded me too of what we see in the end of WandaVision, right? Which that finale still bothers me. That finale always bothers me, just thinking about Paul Bettany building up like, I got to act beside somebody I've always wanted to act beside, and it was just himself. He was just talking about acting.
Paul, man.
But that's what it reminded me of when he, you know, they have that conversation and then he grabs him by the head and shows him like, and that, it always makes me think that that's what makes like people who we are. Like the core of our foundation, like what makes us who we are is like the memories, like that we have, the life that we've lived, the experiences that we've experienced. Like it's not the kinds of things. It's not the car that you own. It's not the house that you live in. It's not the computer, the phone that you have. It's these experiences, these memories, these like the intangible things that you can't carry with you. That will always work so well for me, seeing somebody kind of realize who they are. And I love, not to skip ahead of right here, but I love that conversation that the two of them have as well. That's like talking about, I'm sorry, my dog just threw a toy at me and it just completely made my mind blank on what I was going to say. But it was that, oh man, what were the two of them talking about? You got to help me out here. What were the two of them talking about at the end? Oh, it was like, we don't remember exactly which one of us it was that married Storm, or that married Scott, and which one of us that had Nathan, like, and we don't know when we got I guess Nathan was just born, so they know it was the clone that had Nathan, but they don't know when they got switched and when these things happen. And there's some interesting stuff there too. There's a show that I'm watching right now that's coming out soon based on a book that I've read. It's a book and a show called Dark Matter that is almost exactly about that, like different reality, like the paths that the whole premise of that show is the path not taken. Every time you make a choice in your life, it then splits off into an alternate reality. Like there's a reality, and for this, just as an example, there's a reality where I go to the movie at 1:00 today and skip the podcast. And there's also the one we're in now where I'm going at 3 and we'll record this podcast. So it's like every single thing like that splits off, and then there's all these alternate realities. And that's what it reminded me of, like getting to talk to an alternate version of yourself that's like, I did this and this is how it played, like how surreal that would be. All the stuff between the two Jeans in this episode. You're right. Even just talking about it now, you're so right with what you said at the beginning. This is another 10 out of 10 show. How blessed are we? How lucky are we to get to sit here and talk about two 10 out of 10 shows, man.
Dude, we're feasting, my friend. We are feasting with all this superhero content we're getting. Like you said, both 10 out of 10 shows. And I just want to echo what you said about, the two genes and the path not taken. I love that kind of stuff, dude. I love alternate dimensions, multiverses. Oh, I love it. And I think it just brings up such a great point. And I think something the show is trying to make a point of is, like you said, like, when were they switched, right? And I think Real Jean actually even says, she's like, which one of us was the Phoenix? Which, that's a huge thing. That is huge. Which one turned into the Phoenix? That's a huge differentiator between the two of them, right? So I think that's going to be super. I'm really excited to get more of Madelyne Prior now. So we learn her name is Madelyne Prior, and I also want to point out that her name actually is kind of a play on words, with Prior being a nod to like the prior gene, like Jean's prior life. So that just a fun little comic nod for you. But we got to talk about one of the biggest parts about this whole thing, with the two genes and, them having this conversation that you're just talking about. They got to leave Nathan. Nathan's in the future, man. Like, so after the whole thing was Sinister, he gets this techno sickness, which is what we talked about this a little bit the last time, where, most people know that this baby ends up being Cable. Like, Nathan Summers is Cable. So that kind of explains, how he got his get up when we see him in the future. But so what, again, not having watched the show or really read the comics, and we were talking about this last week, how you were unaware that was Cable. So what were your thoughts about him going to the future with Bishop and them having to leave him?
Well, so that actually is that is the only thing that I knew that their baby, because I know Cable's identity is like Nathan Summers. So I did know last week, like I was like, okay, so this is Cable. But the thing that I kept thinking about this episode is, and everything in live action to animation always translates differently. And I'm not saying that this version is the one that we see in Deadpool or anything like that. I don't think anybody would say that or anything, like, just that we know, at least in the version that I've seen, and then even in alternate ones, like in pictures I've seen in comic books and games, I know Cable has like a metal arm, and like parts of his body are more like not organic, whatever the opposite, whatever the word, inorganic, I guess is the word I'm looking for, like made of metal and these kinds of things. So that was when I was watching that, I was like, wait a minute, is this, in this show it's green? It's not like we've seen it in other things where it's just like metal. I was like, is this the thing that's going to like take over his body and be part of the reason he's not, like, as somebody, like you said, that doesn't have that history? That was the first thing I was thinking. Is this how he like gets all these kind of enhancements, or is it something, or does he go to the future and clear this virus and then like whatever, then he finds it, is he going to come back with, I mean, we know he's from the future from other things, like that's literally his whole thing.
Yeah.
At least in Deadpool, is like, that's the reason he's coming back, is because the Fire Fist killed his wife and his daughter. So it's like, I'm like, is he going to come back with Bishop? Is he going to, and we also know he's not, at least in some of the stuff that I've seen, he's not always the best person. I don't know if I'd call him a villain necessarily, like a pure,
say like an anti-hero.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
I think he's more in that anti-hero category. So I'm like, is he going to stay in the future and kind of do some bad shit in the future, then have to come back and see his family and then be like, oh man, like, now I've got my family here, I should probably be good. I have no idea.
My parents.
My parents are here. I can't be evil now.
Yeah. So, I can't be evil. My mom's here.
Oh man, I don't know if we're gonna get something like that, and that's part of the fun. Like, I love this not knowing, this like having to spend. That's what we weren't able to do with Invincible, because we've already seen the finale. Like, I love not like being able to speculate on what's coming, because I really have no idea whether the two of them are going to be back in it. Like, if the next episode is going to end with him being like, hey, we're back and I fixed your baby, or if that's Bishop's going to come back without him and then Cable comes back a grown man 2 episodes. Like, I have no idea what's going to happen. And I love that kind of mystery to it. That's the stuff in the show, in these shows that now we talk about a lot too, is like with the spoilers and the scoopers, this era that we're in, of people always trying to reveal these little details for clicks that you almost feel like you're navigating a minefield, trying to like go into a movie fresh, not knowing what's going to happen, or
It's
like going movie or
impossible.
TV show. So now, like, I haven't watched a trailer for this. I have not read anything. Everything that I'm watching, and that's because like we talked about last week, I wasn't even sure if I was going to watch the show, and now I can't even believe that was an option because it's so great. But I'm glad that I approached it that way because I just never paid attention to anything, never watched anything, and now I'm invested, but I also am like clueless at the same time. It's like the
Oh,
perfect, it's like
I
the
love
perfect
that.
comparison.
Yeah, I wish I could be in your shoes, man. I gotta say, I am in your shoes in the sense of I only saw the first 3 episodes. So everything, from here on out, I'm watching completely fresh with everybody else. But it's just so exciting. And as far as Cable goes, again, Cable's not a character I'm very versed on, but he was in the original series. Cable was in the original series, and like he pops up. So I'm interested to see how they're, like you said, are they gonna take a break from Nathan and Kate, like oh, they went off to the future and maybe like last couple episodes they bring that back, or right, and Cable comes into play. I'm not sure. I'm interested to see how they're going to play that out as well. I mean, we know that we're getting another season of this, like they've already started working on it, so if we don't get it this season, it's for sure coming. But another thing that we got to talk about, and again, can kind of speculate a little bit on, the last bit of this episode, kind of not end credit scene, but the last bit we're left with, our girl Storm, and she meets a character called Forge in a bar in Texas and kind of sets up everything. Again, we talked about this in last week's episode when we were talking about Storm and, her losing her powers and stuff. So again, I mean, I'm sure just excitement, but what are you thinking with Storm? Who's this Forge guy? What are you thinking of with all that?
That is an excellent question. I have no idea who, like, my only history with Forge is Marvel Snap. I
I would
know,
say
like,
Snap, bro. Snap is
it
killing it with exposing people to characters, man. We need to write them a letter or something.
dude, and that's all I know in Marvel Snap is that he gives characters other powers. So like, it just gives like another card plus 2 power or something. But like, I know nothing else. Like, I didn't know that was who it was. And then when he said his name, I was like, oh yeah, like from the variants and the cards that I've seen, you do look like that. But like when he first sat down and showed up, to me, it wasn't like, oh, that's Forge. Oh, I was like,
Yeah.
who's this? And he was like,
Yep.
the name's Forge or whatever he said. And I was like, oh, I know
Okay.
you. Like, I remember I was like, okay, I know you. But I have no idea who Forge is or what his
Mm.
powers are or anything like that. But I'm excited that we got some more Storm, but I'm also like, I'm even more excited based on what you guys said last week that when Jean loses her, I mean, excuse me, when Storm loses her powers, there's like a really exciting arc in store there. I kind of feel like this is the start of that.
I think it's called
This seems
Slow Death in the comics. Is like that
oh
like storyline, I think is what it's called. Slow Death, something like that.
that name's a little scary. I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't a little bit intimidated by that name and a little worried for what may be in future for Storm.
Hey.
Hearing that name, but so I guess now I want to ask you, given that I have no history with this, like who is Forge and like what are his powers and what do you think he's doing here?
See, that's a gap in my knowledge as well, my friend. Like I'm aware of him, especially like in this, storyline that we're talking about, but I don't know much about him. I know, like you said, kind of similar to you, he has some sort of deal with, a mutant's powers, and like that kind of goes to his power. But I'm kind of in the same boat with you as Forge. I know of Storm's like arc coming, that's going to be coming, but his character specifically, I'm just excited to learn more about, just like everybody else. But something I do want to point out, what I do know of the X-Men from my comic knowledge, is like we talked about last time, like Storm might not have her powers, but do not count out Aurora. Like never doubt Storm. Like she, with or without her powers, is a force to be reckoned with. And in the comics, before she ever even got her powers, she was like the best thief in Egypt and like ran with this like, pickpocket gang in Cairo. When she started developing her powers, she actually walked, I think it was like 2,000 miles for an entire year from Cairo to Africa. And that's when she like started really honing her powers. And she was just 12 years old at this time. So it's like Storm's been through some shit already. Like she's not one to count out. So like you said, Adam, I just again got to echo what you're saying. I'm just so excited to see how they're going to play that storyline for the animation, how much we're going to get of it, because again, we're working with a limited number of episodes here. We got a lot to get through. So I'm just as even though I know a lot of what's coming from the comics, I feel like I'm in the same boat as a lot of people of just being a fan and being excited to see how they're going to translate it, what the differences are going to be. And I mean, like we said, just it's 10 out of 10, 10s across the board, baby. We're just eating so good with this content. Another again 10 out of 10 episode for me for sure.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing too, last thing I'll say is that it's refreshing to me so often when we watch, at least for me, I watch MCU shows and I'm always kind of hoping that we're going to get to see a familiar face or draw a connection or say something that that will make me point at the screen and do the Leo point and be like, hey, I know that, because that's for so long is so much of what I loved about this universe is that every time I watched it, there was connections to other things. And it's refreshing to me to watch this and not have to worry about, hey, is Doctor Strange going to show up and help me? And like, I know this is a me thing. Like there's plenty of creators that have said like, we just kind of wanted to create our own thing, and that's perfectly fine. But it's nice to watch this on the like that. I'll be surprised with whoever we see, especially like we talked about last week. If we get something like a Deadpool cameo, that would be incredible, and I'd love it. But I don't foresee any of that. Like it's not. It reminds me a lot of in Star Wars when but especially recent, like in the Mandoverse, they're doing so many different crossovers. And like when Boba Fett was airing, I knew that the Mandalorian was going to be in Boba Fett, and then they give this like blatantly obvious tease at the end of the episode, which I liked like at the time, but it's like and then I just knew it was coming. There was no surprise like to it at all. So that's what I feel like is missing with so many other things that's present here is this like surprise. They're like, if they're out doing something and all of a sudden Deadpool walks through the door, I am going to be like stunned. Like not because like we're talking about now, I can see it happening, but I have no idea when, where, or like what could lead to that or anything. So when he I say when, if he or anybody else that I know pops up, like I just know it's going to be a surprise, which is that part like we were talking about a few minutes ago is so absent in so much of this stuff now because everybody's trying to report on plot details and what's going on that it's impossible to avoid stuff. So it's just really refreshing to be not even just like the plot, but for cameos or anything like that to be everything to just be completely fresh and to be a surprise because we just don't get that much nowadays.
Yeah, literally impossible. And the last thing I want to say about the X-Men before we wrap this up is with the cameos and all that stuff, I don't want to be the Debbie Downer of the group or like rain on anyone's parade, but I will say, and this is just my opinion, so like I could, like you said, Deadpool walks through that door and like it's Ryan Reynolds and stuff, I'm losing my shit with everybody else. But I will say, in my opinion, I would tamper down the cameo expectations just a tad bit. Just because, and where I'm coming from this is I feel like the show has already kind of laid the groundwork with how we're going to see cameos in this show with Morph and having hit like last episode, he turns into Colossus and Lady Deathstrike and, all these other characters. So again, I don't want to rain on anyone's parade, but I wouldn't be surprised if some of these cameos are going to be more in that vein of like, oh, Morph turned into Deadpool for this 2-second fight scene. You know what I mean? I feel like that's a little bit more maybe what we will get. But like I said, if I'm wrong, I hope I'm wrong. Because I mean, the X-Men animated, the original, does have precedent for bringing in other characters like Captain America, Spider-Man, all that kind of stuff. So we could have an episode with like a full-on team up with another character. But like I said, I don't know. I wouldn't be betting on Vegas for it. You know what I mean? But that's all I'll say about the cameos, just that little tidbit. But other than that, man, I think we really we nailed both these episodes, man. We went through everything. There's probably something that we're forgetting to talk about, but if there is, everyone, please let us know about that in the comments. Let's talk about it if we did forget about it. If you guys enjoyed this episode, please make sure to check out Agents of Fandom on all of our socials, TikTok, Twitter, everywhere else, Facebook, YouTube, anywhere you find entertainment, you can find us. Be sure to also give us a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this episode. Give us 5 stars if you're on another podcasting website. Give us a review, whatever you're willing to do. We would love it. We love talking about nerd stuff and nerding out with everybody. Also, be sure to go check out fandomfi.com for some awesome Agents of Fandom merch. Unfortunately, me and Adam are not wearing any today to show off to you, but I'm going to tell you that they look amazing. They are absolutely awesome. So go check that out. Go check out Adam and everything that he's doing on all the socials. And thank you so much for coming and hanging out with us. We will see you guys all next time.
Peace.